Good morning, everybody. This is Dee Reinhardt with Illinois WorkNet. We are going to be talking about business licensing and registration, and I would like to welcome our guest speaker today. Her name is Laura Wilcox, and she is the president of Corporate Minutes. She is a business compliance advisor, and she helps business owners properly maintain and establish their business entity. Do you want to tell everybody, Laura, real briefly, how you go about doing that?
Well, good morning, everybody, and thanks, Dee, for the intro. I work with individuals who are interested in looking at the ways to start a new business. What I like to do, the approach that I take is there are so many things involved in starting a business. I usually start out with just kind of giving an overview of what that really entails. During that discussion or telephone conference or meeting, questions come up. And I really find it very valuable to have those questions answered before moving forward in any direction when you're starting your business. So I really kind of clarify and confirm maybe what they're thinking about and then the best way to guide them to move in a certain direction.
Good, good. All right, well, let's start with our presentation and go forward and talk a little bit about what is a business plan and where this falls into a business plan. As you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, the business plan steps include each of those items. And during our Starting a Business series, we're going to be covering several of these features. As part of the business plan that you set up for your business, there is a couple of things that we have over on the right-hand side of the screen that may not necessarily be thought of as part of your business plan, but they're things that you need to really, really consider before you even think about whether or not you're going to start your business. And one of those things is business registration. Registration is what we're going to be covering today, and we're going to be talking a little bit about what the difference is between registration and licensing. There's not, in some situations you are required to have licenses, but in many of the situations you are just trying to register your business with all of the government entities that are involved in the process of having your own business. Well, let's move on and talk about how do you set things up. And what we're going to do is we're going to ask Laura a couple of questions here. So which entity do you pick?
Well, as you can see from the ones listed on the screen, there are several options that are available to anyone that is choosing to start a business. So depending on how you anticipate on structuring it, meaning ownership, is it going to be just you? Is it going to be two or more owners? The way that you would like to be taxed, which is a huge question for people. You know, I think that most people are hoping to, when they start their business, find the right way to minimize the amount of taxes that they're going to have to pay. That is very, very important. Also, we're working with the state of Illinois here, so you're going to want to become familiar with how you're going to be treated by the state of Illinois tax-wise, and then most importantly, the ongoing requirements of each of these types of structures. So could I go ahead and give a brief description maybe of just those bullet points? Okay.
Of course.
So sole proprietorship really is what it kind of sounds like. It is a sole proprietor or a single person who is choosing to do business on their own. And sometimes they would do business really formed at the county level. So we're not going to spend a lot of time today on that because really that's very straightforward in forming that. Then you have a partnership, which is a separate entity, but it's usually two or more people. And again, it's going to come down to how you are taxed and also what kind of control you want over the business with or without that other partner. So think of a partnership as, you know, two or more people, and then again, it's going to be taxed a little bit differently than if you were to choose one of the other structures.
Okay.
You have an LLC, which is a limited liability company, not to be confused with a corporation. It is an entity that is separate, separates the individual from their business, but it combines that pass-through taxation with the limited liability protection for the owners, but it's not a corporation. Then you
Okay.
have your SCorp, which is, again, is a flow-through entity. It provides liability protection like the limited liability company, but it's actually a tax election that you make with the IRS to be taxed as an S-Corp. And
Okay.
then last on the list is a C-Corp, which is your basic, I will use that term, kind of basic corporation that is double taxed, and it is separate from its owner, so provides liability protection, but it would be double taxed. So
And
obviously you
so
can see from, oh, go ahead.
which is the one that you would have stocks and be traded on the stock exchange?
Um, you mean if you were going to be publicly traded?
Correct.
That'd be the C-Corp.
Okay. But most small businesses would probably fall under the limited liability company or an S corporation.
Um, yes, when you say small, if you're talking one or two owners that are just starting up, that would be the most popular one that you would start out with. As you grow, you could then choose to be a C Corp if your assets are growing and your accountant or CPA kind of dictate that would be the best route to go. But yes, most small businesses start out with the corporation, the S Corp or the LLC.
And so today, because we're dealing with small businesses, we're going to focus primarily on the limited liability company and the S corporation. And always, with any of these sorts of decisions that you need to be making about your company, you want to always consult with a professional who can help you make that decision. Those professionals include an attorney, a certified public accountant, or business advisor. And one of those things that you can do is to go to the Small Business Administration to look at some of their resources that are available, and that link and we want to talk a little bit about, is this something that you want to do it yourself, or do you really want to discuss it with a professional? Laura, what's your opinion?
Well, I think that a lot of people, think that they can do it themselves, and depending again on what structure you're going to do, that is possible to, do some research, get online, start to look at your options, and you can most certainly move in that direction if you feel very confident. I encourage people that I talk to, before they do that, to really do their research and talk to some professional providers, namely an attorney and an accountant, more importantly, in my opinion, an accountant. A lot of the decisions that you can make on how you structure yourself are going to be based on how you're going to be taxed and then your ongoing requirements. So I think that it's a good thing to combine the two. First and foremost, do your research. Whether you then proceed to do it on your own and you feel confident, if you're going through the steps and you feel like you're going to get stuck, then consult a professional. If you, in the front end, want to consult a professional to really find out which way you should go, that would be a good idea as well. So I'd say a mixture of the both would be okay.
Good, good. And we have a note here that no matter what option you do, you need to make sure that whatever you're filling out, wherever you're filling it out, print and save a copy of all of those documents for your records, because that is sometimes your only proof of what you have accomplished.
Absolutely. One of the things that I see very frequently is that people do attempt to go online and register their business, and they may get a confirmation on the screen, and they print that out, or sometimes they don't, and they forget to print it out. It's really important to walk away with any online work that you do with an actual copy of the form that you submitted. You at least have some kind of record of what you've done.
Right, exactly. And if you're doing it yourself, we have a couple of notes over here in the right-hand little box here that if you are doing it yourself, do not overlook the fact that you need these items for your organization's records. You need a copy of bylaws, an operating agreement, minutes, proof of capital contribution, and a buy-sell agreement. Laura, would you like to briefly explain what those last two items mean?
Sure. Your proof of
Or any of them
concept.
for that matter.
Right. So these are kind of the additional documents that are not just very obvious when you go online to do your research of what is required. Or if it is mentioned, it can get a little confusing as to in what order things should be done. So let's say somebody goes online, registers their business after doing their research and feels really good about it. People continue to just start, hang up their shingle and get their business cards printed and think that they're all ready, to do business. The things listed on the side here are very, very important in order to kind of complete that registration process. The bylaws and the operating agreement may be very obvious. Minutes, a lot of people don't know. Those are the actual documentation of how you've structured the business. It's kind of a recap or an overview. And then the proof of capital contribution is even if you are a sole owner of an LLC or a corporation, just like every corporation, in order to get shares or have ownership in a company, you have to pay for it. So that's what capital contribution is. You're going to want proof of what that is, whether it's a wire transfer into the corporate checking account, whether it's a personal check that you wrote into the corporate or company account. You're going to want that proof because going forward, if you're audited or if something comes up, if you bring on another owner in the business, you're going to want to be able to show that you actually purchased your stock or ownership. The buy-sell agreement is very, very important in a two or more person environment. That is going to be an agreement between the owners of what would happen to their stock or their ownership in the case of a death, a divorce, a disgruntlement. And this is a piece that is very vital to the success of an ongoing business. If somebody goes into
you say divorce, and that doesn't necessarily mean a personal where you're married divorce, but it could very definitely mean your business partner and you get a divorce. And I've seen that happen in people that I know that have their own businesses.
Absolutely. A partnership in a business you have to think of as a marriage of some sort. It is a partnership and a marriage, and if that were to split in any way, you're going to want to make sure you have that documentation in place so then the company can be perpetual or can continue on.
Correct. Great. Let's move on to the next slide. We're going to start with some of the state items. And again, if you have any questions about how the money is going to flow or about the rate of taxation and all of those sorts of things, you probably need to be consulting with your accountant to make sure that you are making the exact proper decision that you need to do for your company. This is just a general overview of what you would need to do as a small business when it comes to the money and the legality of the organization. You do want to make sure that you consult with those professionals. So let's move on to the state, and this is what you would need to visit if you are going to be setting things up with the state. And first and foremost, we want to talk a little bit about what it means to do business as. So Laura, would you like to explain that for us?
And you form a sole proprietor at a county level, not a state level. So we're kind of going back to that one slide. If you choose to do business as a sole proprietor, an individual choosing to promote themselves by a company name, that is called the DBA, or doing business as. And you would create or you would form that DBA at a county level. So you would want to check with your county and municipality of where the business is going to be located, not necessarily where you live unless you have a home-based business, of the requirements to actually properly register that DBA with the county. Usually what that entails is that you need to fill out a fairly simple application, pay a fee which ranges anywhere from $25 to $150, and fill it out, pay the fee, and then you need to do what they call a public notice. You need to put an ad in the paper for anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks, announcing to the public that the individual intends to do business by the name that it has chosen. That gives the public notice that you're going to be using that name, or you intend to use that name, and if anybody has any problems or has a reason to dispute that, that gives them the opportunity to dispute the fact that you're going to use that name. So that is just really a county-level based way of starting your business. It's it's the least expensive option, but may not be favorable tax-wise, but it could be an option for somebody who's maybe just feeling out their new business and doesn't really know where it's going to go right now.
Right. So, for example, if somebody has just gotten laid off from a job and they want to maybe try and start consulting, they might want to do business as for a little bit of time and just figure out whether or not something is going to work for them, and then they can go through the steps of getting incorporated or forming an LLC.
Yes, that's exactly right. The one thing I would like to add is that this type of structure does not really provide any liability protection, as it's not an entity separate from themselves.
Great, great. Let's move to the next slide and talk about what the Secretary of State can offer for you. And we've got LLC, which stands for Limited Liability Company, SCorp, which is, I'm not quite sure what the S stands for, Laura, and then we're going to talk a little bit about Renewal. So would you like to, well, we'll wait until that slide with the SCorp, but we have a link there that you can go to look at the Secretary of State's office, and we also have their phone number on there, so that if you want to find out any of those specific things after the presentation, we'll talk about that for you. But a limited liability company is an LLC, and do you want to talk a little bit about the items that we have on the slide here?
Okay, a limited liability company, again, is, remember, not a corporation. It is an entity that is separate from the owner or owners, and you have a couple of different options too regarding, how you're taxed, which we can go into just very briefly because it can get a little complicated. That is why it really is important for you to discuss your options, with a good CPA or accountant before you go in any one direction. An LLC, one of the benefits of an LLC is that you do have a little bit flexibility of how you're taxed. On the slide, you have a company versus partnership. A limited liability company, you can actually be taxed as a sole proprietor, a partnership, or a corporation, depending on how you set it up. With respect determine that it's availability or it's available, and then submit that with the state. One of the things that's going to be on that form is the registered agent. A registered agent, a lot of people think as they're going through the form, they just naturally put themselves down and along with their address, and they think, oh, okay, that's the person that's has control or is in charge of, or the contact person. This is really important that people understand what a registered agent is. It is actually a person that the company designates responsible for two things. First and foremost, process of service. If the company in any way is going to get served by a sheriff's department or a process server, not necessarily because they're getting sued, but maybe because they need to receive notice of something that's going on with one of their clients or vendors, the registered agent on file with the Secretary of State's office is who that information is going to be sent to. So it's very, very important that when you are considering who the registered agent is, it's going to be a person who is going to be available to be able to receive that delivery, and also receive the annual renewal that that is due by the state of Illinois each year, because that's who it's going to be sent to. So the registered agent is an individual or company in some instances that the company designates to fulfill that role and those responsibilities.
And would somebody like your company be able to fulfill that requirement?
Yes, our company can, because we're registered with the state of Illinois as a company that is able to do that. You cannot designate
and or
your
somebody's
own.
attorney?
Yes.
Okay.
And or accountant. You can designate whoever you want to be your registered agent. You just need to feel confident that he or she will be responsible in being able to fulfill those duties.
I see. Okay. All right, and the next bullet point we have is the difference between a managed by managers or managed by members, and this is specific to a limited liability company or a limited liability partnership, right?
Let's stay focused, if we could, on the LLC. I think that
okay.
yeah, member managed. That's okay. A member managed or manager managed is related to the LLC. Yes.
Okay. Okay, and the difference between those two means?
You have a choice when forming an LLC who is going to have control over the business. And sometimes that can be confusing, or you're not sure, especially in an instance where there are multiple people. So let's just stick with, for the sake of discussion, you would only have to maybe really think about which way you want to go if you had two or more owners or members. Members are owners. Let's first say that. So if you're a single member LLC, I will say that most people over the business. If you were to have multiple members, you could still choose to be member managed. That means that each of the members or owners would have full and total control over the business. Sometimes that's not a structure that some people want. For instance, I'm sure everybody's heard of the term silent partners.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
the idea of a silent partner is for that partner to be silent. You know, silent in voice, silent in fulfilling responsibilities. So let's say you have a multiple member LLC, and let's say two to keep it simple. And say one member really is the person that's going to be putting the money into the business, funding it, an investor, but doesn't really want to have anything to do with the day-to-day operations of the business. Doesn't want control, doesn't want to have to, say or do really anything, wants to give that authority to the other member. That's an instance that you would choose to be managed by managers, not members. So you would appoint the person that is then responsible for the day-to-day as the manager, and you would make it a manager-managed LLC.
All right, great. And we've got the different links down at the bottom for the difference between a limited liability partnership or a limited liability company, so that you can go to the Secretary of State's website and review the differences between those two items. And again, you would want to speak with your attorney or your accountant to figure out what is the best structure for your particular business. Let's talk a little bit about an S corporation. And over on the box on the right-hand side, we see the LTD. So let's talk a little bit about that particular entity. What's the big difference here, Laura?
Between the LLC and the SCorp?
Yes.
Okay, well, the LLC, again, is not a corporation. It's a limited liability company. And so we just kind of went through the different ways to structure that. And again, the LLC can be taxed. You have some choices with how it's taxed. An SCorp, and going back to that other screen, Dee, where you had said, you're not really sure what that means. This is kind of important. When you initially create a corporation with the state of Illinois, you are by default a C Corp, unless you do what they call making the S election, which is choosing go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, which is choosing a different way to be taxed overall by the IRS and state government.
Okay.
So when you incorporate, you're a C Corp. Then you make the S election, which makes you an S Corp. It turns it into a pass-through. You're not double taxed, and you are considered an S Corp, not to be confused with small. It means it's an S election, which you are electing to be treated as a small business, tax-wise. Okay?
All right.
So first and foremost, you are going to want to check the availability of your name. You do that with the Secretary of State's office.
Okay.
The options that you've listed there are simply, I call them extensions. It's going to be the extension or last word in your name. So you can choose to be ABC Corporation, ABC Company, ABC Incorporated, ABC Limited, or an abbreviation of any one of those 4 options. But your corporate name must contain one of those words or abbreviations. Of incorporation with the Secretary of State. Again, you're going to want to discuss your tax options before you make that election, and you're also going to want to make sure that you discuss things like your initial contribution that we talked about earlier. What does that mean? How much does it need to be? What should it be? So as you move forward and you are preparing your taxes at the end of the year, that information is correct.
Okay. All right. And then, again, we need to make sure that everybody talks with their accountant or CPA to figure out which tax option is going to be best for them.
Absolutely.
All right. Now, renewals is all part of the thing that we need to do with the government when we have formed a corporation. So one of the things that we need to do is annually we need to send in our renewal form, and that's based on the initial application date. So it's not necessarily just January or the end of the year. It could be any time in the course of the year, right, Laura?
Correct. The annual renewal due date is based on the month in which you actually form your entity.
And what are a couple of the other things that we have to do annually besides pay our taxes based on our business income?
Well, let's stick, if we can, just to really try and keep it as simple as we can. I know, because there's a lot to do each year, but we're still focusing on the Secretary of State. So that is one government agency that you are going to have to deal with to initially create your entity, and then on an annual basis, you will have to renew your entity to keep it in good standing. That annual renewal is sent to the registered agent on file with the Secretary of State's office. So again, make sure that that person is going to be where they need to be at an address. If you're moving, you have to make sure it's up to date. But that annual renewal will be sent to that registered agent on file. It is always due. In Illinois, your annual renewal is always due the first day of the month in which you were formed. So if you're incorporated here in May or June, it would be due May 1st or June 1st. So it has to be filed and received and filed by the state to be on time. So really the annual renewal is the only thing that you have to do with the Secretary of State. But you have other annual requirements, also known as corporate minutes or annual minutes, where you have an annual meeting of shareholders and board of directors, even if it's just one, and you have to document your decisions that you've made over the last 12 months. That is what helps keep your liability protection in place and keeps you insulated from liability.
All right, good, good. All right, the Illinois Department of Revenue is the other area where we need to check things. So first of all, we've got the Secretary of State and electing which form of entity we want to form, LLC or SCorp election. And then we need to register with the Illinois Department of Revenue. And why do we need to register with them?
Well, the Illinois Department of Revenue handles a couple of things for name, address, EIN number, your purpose. But then you need to decide, okay, what else do I need to register for? Am I going to be doing sales? Do I need to register for sales tax? Which I know you're going to go into that a little bit later. Do you need to register for withholding? Am I going to have employees? Some people think, that if they're going to be their only person in the business, well, they may think that they're not going to have any employees. It's just them, but they themselves may be the employee. So again, you're going to want to have a clear understanding of the structure, and what that really entails before registering. But the business registration with the Illinois Department of Revenue really covers three basic areas: initial registration, sales tax, and unemployment.
Right. All right. All right. Next, we have the Illinois Department of Employment Security, and we need to register our business with the Illinois Department of Employment Security, or we call it IDES for short, and that's so that we can, if we have employees, make sure that we're paying our quarterly contributions based on the wages that our employees earn. And one of the things that we can do with them is create an online account so that we can file and pay those taxes to IDES to support unemployment for our employees.
Again, depending on how you do your structure, you may or may not have to register for IDES, but if you're going to have an employee, even if it's yourself, then yes, you would need to do that.
Great, great. And we have our link here for our online option there. So, and we have that in a box in our next section as we close up too. Now, local government. Now we know that we have a lot of different municipalities and counties in the state of Illinois. It's one of the things that we need to do on a regular basis is check to make sure that we have all of our ducks in a row, as we should say, for anywhere that we might want to be. So if I live in one place and you live in another, the registration might be different based on those locations. So what would we want to check with locally or for the county?
You would just go to your county clerk's office or contact them and inquire what licenses or permits would be required for you to run your business. They would probably want to know your address or general area from where you'd be operating and what type of business that you're in, and then they would give you the requirements that you'd have to adhere to. But every county is different. So that one is, you'd have to just kind of do the research on your own when you're ready to do that.
And I do know that Chicago has a whole section of their website set up for starting a business in the city limits of Chicago. So you might want to check with some of the larger cities and definitely check with your county. Now we have a little bit here about certain regulatory licensing, and those are examples that we have listed here. A brewery, what's going on with that?
Oh, well, certain types of industries or businesses, obviously because of the service or product that they're going to be offering to the public, must also adhere to other licenses and permits, such as a brewery. Obviously, it's going to need to make sure that for health inspections, health safety, than just a straight brewery. So because of the nature of the business, some of those things, additional permits may apply.
All right, great. So it's always best to check all of these things to see what's what before you actually say, hey, I'm going to open my doors for business, because that's when you get in trouble, right?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. So now federally, we have a few things that we need to check on, and sorry about the image there. It doesn't include Hawaii and Alaska and Puerto Rico and all those other kind of things, but you get the idea, right, that it's federal. So what we're going to look at now is we need to get a tax identification. And why do we need that, Laura?
Well, think of your tax business entity, or I'm sorry, just think of your EIN number, which stands for Employer Identification Number, as your business's identity number. Just like an individual has a Social Security number, your business has an EIN number. And part of the idea and part of the reason for that is that once you form your business, you're doing that, one of the reasons is to separate it from yourself. So you're going to want your business to have its own EIN number or identification number. So when you are filling out any other paperwork, opening up a bank account, applying for maybe a merchant account or so forth, you're going to want to use your business name and its EIN number as opposed to your Social Security number. You're also going to need that number when you are applying for and also then remitting any of your taxes to the various state government or federal government agencies.
Right.
So once you obtain it, you will be using it on everything to identify your business.
So the entity actually becomes its own person, for lack of a better word.
Correct.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yep.
All right. And again, no matter what you do, if you fill it out yourself or if you print the forms and mail it, make sure that you print a copy for your records. And we have a link at the bottom of the page here that shows you where you can go on the IRS website to obtain that tax identification number. So trademark versus service mark. Let's discuss this a little bit. What's the difference?
Well, this is an area that I would suggest that people really wait to do a little bit maybe after they form their entity. The reason why is that you're going to want to wait for your business to be formed to see if there's any, changes in your logo, in your message, in your services that you're actually going to be offering. But a trademark versus service mark is basically a way to protect or to take possession of, if for the lack of a better term, of your name or logo. And on a basic level, a service mark is a word or a phrase or a symbol or logo, that's used to identify what you're going to be offering. A trademark is, it can be a word, a phrase, or a logo as well, but it's used to identify and distinguish a product that you're selling. So depending on what it is that you are offering, a product or a service, will determine whether you go for a trademark or service mark. And that is usually done after your logo is developed and your marketing strategies are developed and you've gone through your business plan and you kind of have an idea of what that's going to look like. You could either do it after you form your entity or while you're in the motions of doing that. To apply for a trademark or service mark, though, you're going to have to provide examples of your logo or your symbol that you're wanting to get marked. So usually it's beneficial to wait until you've gone through that process just to make sure everything's kind of panned out before you apply.
And so before somebody has that TM after their name, they would have a register, an R in it because they've registered it, but the trademark hasn't been issued yet. Correct?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So that looks like we're down to questions, and we do have a few questions that we need to answer from the audience that came in. And we had a question, is there a labor market code or rate that a registered business owner under an S corporation or an LLC fall under? And really, that labor market information, it's I think you're mixing ideas there when the person asks that question, because it is you fall under the business that you have. So if you're a doctor, it would be a doctor. If it was a marketing person, it would be a marketing. That's where the labor market information would fall under there. We have another question. You select, the question is, where does one get the title or name registration for the business? And you make that up on your own, and that's where you would check to see where it is with that, checking that USPTO to make sure that somebody else doesn't have your name. And when you register, that's when you start making money so that you can do all of your other expenses. And we do have a webinar coming up on financing your business so that until you begin earning enough revenue, that would help you with that. We've got a question about what forms need to be filed on the Secretary of State Illinois website. And so initially it is the registration form, whether or not you pick LLC or SCorp. You'll need to do that. There are a few other forms, Laura, right, that you need to file with the Secretary of State?
If you choose to do an assumed name or something, which is not to be confused with the DBA, that you would do that form at the same time. But really the Secretary of State is the only form that you would file with that office is the initial formation document.
Okay. All right. And then let's go on to the next question. Is there a list or a way to check on a CPA or an attorney to make sure that they know enough about forming a business for you?
Well, there's definitely some resources out there that you can look to see where the CPAs are located and the attorneys are located geographically to you, which I'm guessing you'd want somebody close. In my opinion, the best way to kind of choose your accountant and your attorney should be people that you can talk to, that you feel comfortable with, that you feel are knowledgeable. So I find that sometimes the way to figure that out is, one, if you're referred to him or her by somebody that you trust, that's a good first way to know in which direction to go. Or, call and ask for an initial consult or a little get-to-know, just so you could get to talk to them, have some questions beforehand, and think of it as an interview. This is really a personal thing. When starting your business, you really need to feel good about who it is that you're going to depend on. So sometimes just asking for an initial consult or an initial meeting just to get to know them a little bit is the good way to go.
Great. And then we had one final question that has come up, and the tax identification number that you obtain from the the Internal Revenue Service is useful for your organization no matter where you're registering your business. It would be federal, state, or local. Is that correct? You only want the one EIN number.
Is this question to the right here? Does the Internal Revenue Service offer the tax identification number for federal and state purposes? Is that
correct?
The question?
Correct.
Okay. That's a little vague, but let me try and clarify. You will be assigned and have to obtain several different numbers when completely registering your business. Go back to the slides at the beginning. You need to register with the Illinois Secretary of State, the Illinois Department of Revenue, the Illinois Department of Employment Security, as well as the Internal Revenue Service. So you will obtain is your state charter number from the Secretary of State's office. That will allow you to then apply for the EIN number from the IRS. The EIN number will then be used for all subsequent licenses, permits, and applications. So there's a specific order that things need to be done in, and I would strongly suggest that you do not get your EIN number before you actually form your corporation or LLC.
Good. Good. Now we have one other question that came in from the audience. Can you have two different companies named the same, not owned by the same person, but do two different services?
If you're talking about, no, that's the answer is no.
Okay. All right. And it looks like we are done with our questions. And I just wanted to get back to our beginning slide so that I can thank Laura Wilcox, who is the president of Corporate Minutes. Again, she is a business compliance advisor. She helps small businesses and corporations as well as LLCs make sure that they have all of the documents that they need and maintain those on a regular basis. And you can find Laura at corporateminutes.net. Thank you very much, Laura, for joining us today. I really appreciate your time. It was wonderful of you to spend your time with us to make sure that all of our participants and the people that are going to watch this recording in the future will have questions answered that they might guide them in the right area where they need to go. So let's bring over our closing slide here, and let's ask everybody to fill in the poll questions for us. And while they're doing that, Laura, do you have any last words of advice that you would like to give our audience?
Well, first of all, thank you for the thank you, Dee. I enjoyed this opportunity, and, you know, the thing that I would want to say to anybody starting a business is that it is important that you know, do your research and kind of figure out ahead of time what path it is that you want to take. So that's where your business plan really comes in. I think people kind of skip that step, and really that is an opportunity for you to kind of lay things out and really make a plan for yourself. The other is that it should be fun. It should be an enjoyable journey, and too many times people, you know, get so frustrated or get, you know, just tripped up on all the different material and information that's out there, and it can become very confusing and very frustrating. So I would encourage you to seek the advice of a professional provider and who could just answer your questions and allow that journey to be an enjoyable one.
Great. Thank you so much. Please take a moment. We will leave the webinar open for you so that you can click on each of these links in the link pod, just so that in case you need them, you can do that and have those on your browser window. Please download the handout if you did not already get to do that. It is a copy of our slides, and it is in PDF format for you. And watch for our upcoming webinars, and we hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.